Hi Jake, welcome to Time Team Tea Time. Quite often we would give you a ring about a particular piece of technology. How many time teams did you do, Jake?
I think I did 5, but one of them certainly was so successful archaeologically that there wasn't time to include the cameo bit.
Oh,
I made a lovely Bronze Age shale, no, not shale, Whitby jet necklace up in Scotland, but it was not seen by anybody, which is a
oh.
shame.
Now at Beauport Park, we asked you to try and reconstruct a Roman furnace, I think it was. And I'm interested, where did you go to find the kind of furnace you thought they would have used? What were your sources? And what did you need to build it? What did you have to have on site?
Okay, well, I can't actually remember you asking me to build a specifically Roman furnace, although I knew it was a Roman site and I knew it was a smelting site. And I didn't actually go anywhere to look for a furnace. I built a furnace that I knew would work, of a type that is fairly universal, but I didn't model it on any particular furnace I'd seen or researched, to be honest. So it's just a bog standard. Actually, it wasn't completely bog standard, because looking back on it, I just looked at the program again. It's quite a dome-shaped furnace and quite a bit shorter than most of the ones I was building at the time. But I just made you a furnace that would do the trick, hopefully.
And I'm quite interested in the idea, my limited knowledge on this is that as you go through the metals, bronze to iron and then steel, a lot of this is to do with temperature, is that right? So was the furnace you constructed for us at Beauport Park, did it have to reach a certain temperature? What temperature was it? And what was the difficulty about creating iron out of that furnace?
Okay, well, that's a number of questions, but the difficulty of obtaining the right temperature in that furnace was that you asked us to do it 3 days, and you need, if you're driving off moisture in wet clay, it's very difficult to achieve a high temperature, which is why we built it very rapidly and then spent a day and a half desperately trying to dry it in order for it to reach anywhere near the required temperature. And as far as the other metals are concerned, we could probably have smelted any other metal in it, but for iron you need a higher temperature. And looking at the program again, we got excited, or Phil got very excited to see, I think, a temperature approaching 1100 degrees on the thermocouple. Well, actually, you never put the thermocouple right by where the air is coming in, because it will burn the tip of it off. But 1100 is just about hot enough. But usually you've got a hot zone that's hotter than that, up to 1400, something like that. So we did the job, but it probably wasn't really quite hot enough.
And whereabouts did you source your ore from, Jake? And in the Iron Age, where would people have been finding the ore in this country?
Okay, well, I think the local Wealden smelting group had brought some ore, but I was rather keen to go and find my own ore. And there was a tile works next door to the golf course, and I walked around in that, and in the clay that they use for the making the tiles, there's some lovely nodules of what looked to me very nice ore. So that's actually where we got it from. Very well, actually, what we used was what they would have used right there, and it was very nice ore. And it's little nodules that occur within the clay, and because it was such a good ore, I went back there several times afterwards to get more of that ore for later smelts. And the way I found it was walking down the course of the local streams, and where the clay is washed away, leaving the lumps of ore, hopefully. And I think in prehistoric times, to begin with anyway, you'd find the ore where you could see it. In other words, where the land has been washed away at the coast or on the banks of a river, or perhaps revealed by farming. But what you need really is a window into what's under the vegetation, which is not always easy to find. Once you know where it is, you can go and dig and mine and whatever.
And what's the difference between that sort of ore, and I think you've referred to bog iron when we were chatting. What's the sort of difference between those two sources of ore?
Well, that not a great deal when it comes to smelting, but in terms of the origin, the ore that we use that came out of the clay is several million years old. I'm not sure the exact number of millions of years, but bog ore is forming all the time if you've got iron in the groundwater, and is precipitating out at the bottom of lakes and in bogs. And in the right places, it's growing all the time. And so you chemically they're quite similar, but bog ore is a younger ore and it's very friable. It's a bit biscuit-like well, it can be crumbly. Sometimes it forms into much harder nodules, and the nodules we use were a bit like the harder type of bog ore. They're quite similar in form.
And there's two bits of stuff I remember from that shoot, two words connected with what you were doing. Was one, the idea of a bloom, that a bloom becomes important, and what is a bloom? And I seem to remember something about 2 years or 2 years. Was that part of it?
Oh, right, okay. Not one year or 3 years, 2 years.
2 years.
Right, okay. The bloom, to start off with, the bloom is the big lump of iron that's a bit like a cauliflower. It's what you're hoping to achieve. The iron that is you're reducing from the ore sticks together, joins together, but they're the waste, the products you don't want, the silica and other things, drain out of it as slag, the liquid stuff that flowed out of the furnace to begin with. And what is left behind is this big lump, like a cauliflower. And that's called the bloom. And that you take that out of the furnace and start hitting it quickly while it's still hot. And that's what you will compress into an iron bar. So that's the bloom. The tuyere is a French word meaning tube. And it's the clay tube that you blow the air down into the furnace. And that's where the oxygen supply is concentrated. So you get a very, very hot area just at the end of the tuyere, and that's where the bloom forms. So those are two key ideas that happen in the furnace.
And what did you use to increase the draft? Did you use a natural bellows, or did we rig you up with a hairdryer or something like that? What gave you the draught?
Okay, certainly not natural draught, because it's a very low furnace, and the taller the shaft, the more chance you'll get of the chimney effect. That didn't come into it at all. And as far as I remember, the local Wealden smelting group provided the bellows. They looked, in the film, they looked quite difficult to use, and they weren't my bellows because I hadn't got anything like it. I can't remember if we used any other types, electric bellows or whatever. I quite often use hair dryers now for little furnaces. I can't remember if we then had a bouncy castle blower as a way of blowing air, but mainly we were using those mechanical leather and wood bellows.
And that bloom, once you'd hammered it, and it produces an iron ingot, I guess, essentially. Is that what the Romans would then have gone on to make nails, boat fittings, things like that from? Does that get hammered and cut and formed?
Yes, what we produced in that program was quite small. I don't think if at the time when Beauport Park was a big industrial area, they would have been happy with tiny little blooms like that. They would have probably wanted something of 15 kilos, big lumps. And I imagine they would actually process that down to a bar as part of the, it would be taken from the furnace and then hammered out, reheated, hammered out, and it would be traded as bar, I imagine. And then that bar is the raw material for smithing anything you want. So basically it's a two-stage process. You smelt it first and then turn it into bar, and then the smithing comes after that.
And do you know, if I remember seeing tin and other metals stamped by the Romans to say that where this came from, did they stamp these iron bars? And have you seen Roman ingots that are the property of that particular Roman legion or whoever's doing the smelting?
I haven't, but I'm quite ignorant, and it might be the case that there are bars that are stamped in such a way. But what I would say is earlier on, there were what we now term currency bars, and they were bars of iron that were a bit like the blanks for swords, and they had their own distinctive shape. So a particular maker might have a curled up end at one end and a flattened out end at the other. And the quality of their workmanship would be recognized by the bar that they traded. So in Iron Age time, certainly there was a recognizable type of trading item produced by certain smelters, but there wasn't any lettering on it. And to be honest, I don't really know what they did in Roman times, whether they stamped their bars or not.
And Jake, you've been a smelter, a smith all your life. And when you look back at objects from the past, have you found items made from iron that have made you think, my God, this smith was at the top of his trade? What objects from the past do you look at and sort of revere as the best stuff in iron that you've come across?
Well, first of all, I should correct you. I haven't been a smelter and a smith all my life. And in fact, I'm not really a smith. I like smelting. I do some smithing, but I'm so interested in the process of producing iron from rock. I do more of that than the actual working up of the metal I produce. And I never had there was no practical teaching when I was at school. So it was only when I became a teacher teaching technology that I got interested in how things were made, and that was how I started getting interested in smelting. There are any number of remarkable artifacts. I personally tend to like the more mundane kind of objects made of iron, like, for example, I'm thinking of some wonderful railings that went round the high altar in a cathedral in France that are probably 9th or 10th century, that are just, the quality of the iron is superb and the workmanship is superb, but it's not sophisticated. Some of the very fancy ironwork I can see is impressive, but doesn't interest me so much. There's absolutely remarkable ironwork produced in Africa, and I've recently saw a wonderful exhibition in Paris called Striking Iron, which is a collection of all the best ironwork from that continent collected from all over the world. There's a bell from an abbey in Ireland that I love. It's a simple thing. It was a bloom hammered out into a sheet and then folded and riveted and then dipped in bronze. It's a fairly mundane thing, but that's the kind of object I'm really interested in making.
And I remember discussing with you, and I've heard iron referred to as a more democratic metal, or a more easily accessible metal. Is that because it's easier to get hold of than some of the other metals? What does it mean, that, or is that just something I've picked up from?
I think it's a good term. Basically, the metals that first became available were quite, like gold and copper, very easy to spot, and very easy to work, or relatively easy to work, but quite rare. So they ended up in the hands of the wealthy, the elite. They were never really available to most people. Iron was the first metal that everyone could own, eventually. At first, it was only the elite could control it, but the actual ore is abundant across the earth, and eventually everyone could own tools of iron or steel. So in that sense, it became the democratic metal.
And if you were going into battle, Jake, and you had a choice of swords, what advantage would having an iron sword or a steel sword give you over bronze or any of the other earlier materials?
Well, at first, not much advantage, because the earliest iron tools and weapons tended to be quite soft and bendy, and a very high quality bronze sword is superior to a low quality iron weapon. But steel can be hardened and formed into a tool that's actually sharper and harder than any bronze. So eventually steel swords became a far superior weapon. So and there's no limit really to how good they could get. And the Japanese produced extraordinary swords, and there are all these legendary swords that were so hard and so fine they could slice through. Oh, there are amazing legends about the very best steel swords, which are quite fun. So steel, a steel sword would be best.
We had a chat with Bernard Cornwell, whose books feature a lot of Viking and Anglo-Saxon battles. And one of the things he talks about is the pattern-welded swords that the Vikings, I think in particular, were keen on. and that pattern welding, which I think you visited in your journeys around the world in Japan. The pattern welded sword is an extraordinary object with multiple bars. Where did that begin, and what were the finest examples you've seen of that?
Well, I think there are various different traditions of making. It's really the raw material that these swords are made of is critical to how the pattern comes out. And India was the source of the finest steel available in certainly the Western world for many centuries, and that was made in little crucibles, and then it was traded to all over the place. Similarly, very good steels from Sri Lanka and the middle of Asia, and that extremely fine steel was formed with softer iron, forged together and then twisted, and the patterns come out of the interplay of the hard steel and the softer iron. And there are actually many traditions. The advantage is that you can get a springy, you can get a very hard cutting edge, but you can get springiness, you get toughness of iron. And some of these weapons people spent thousands of hours on. They're almost fetish. They became a sort of fetish. So even now, I mean, a lot of people are obsessed with them, and a lot of people spend their lives making them even now when there's not much immediate need for them.
And I remember reading somewhere that in the case of the African smiths, there's a degree of social, I suppose, magic, if you like, that the knowledge of how to produce metal is something which is very important in society, and therefore the smiths are a sort of guild of slightly magical characters because it's such an amazing thing to do. Did you have any experience of that when you were in Africa?
Well, I was very interested to be thinking about these things when I went to Africa, and particularly to compare in Western Africa, the metal workers, the smiths were very high status people, close to God, and in certain parts of Africa, God is a blacksmith. So the smiths were very, very high status, but people to be wary of and frightened of. They're a bit apart. And in some parts of Eastern Africa, the smiths were also people to be wary of, highly respected, but seen as dangerous in a bad way, and were excluded from their communities. That I didn't see that in practice in any way, and I only visited for a month at a time, and I couldn't possibly expect to see those things, but I'd read a lot about it, and I found it very interesting that this idea, digging something out of the earth, that the earth is generally given great respect and is sacrosanct, and you tear an ore out of the earth, it means you're doing dangerous, devilish sort of things. So the people who did that also got asked to bury the dead and circumcise the children, and all things that are sort of on the edge of being acceptable. And that's quite, I found quite interesting, but I didn't obviously observe any of that. I was just thinking about it.
And I know you've traveled around the world, Jake. You've made a sort of a whole series of journeys to discover people who have these skills. Is there, when one particular country you went to or one person you met, in the face of whose skills you were sort of in awe? Was there somebody who seemed to have such good skills in your area that you would be like bowing down in front of them?
Yes, there is, but it wasn't really a question of bowing down or being in awe of the particular person so much as well, I'll try and explain. It's still, it was an experience that still moves me, and I still haven't managed to put it adequately in words. I went to a remote part of India where there are people who still make iron in clay furnaces from ore. That's died out almost everywhere in the world, and that it's been dying out for the last century. And it's died out, apart from for political reasons and colonial reasons, it's died out because the supply of steel from derelict vehicles and so on has replaced the need for making it from scratch, which is very time consuming. But this area I went to, the villagers knew how to make iron, and they loved making iron. And I was lucky enough to stay with this family, and we did everything. They through an interpreter, we managed to communicate that I would stay there while they built a furnace, collected ore, made charcoal, smelted it, did the whole thing. And that was incredibly moving, because that area, the people themselves, their traditions say that their ancestors drank slag and ate iron. They were actually 12 brothers who made the world out of iron. And this is part of their religion and their belief. And it still continues even today. I mean, I went there in 2006 the last time, so I'm assuming it still continues. But those people are very, very close to one of the earliest places there's evidence for iron smelting, from about 1500 BC. And it's extraordinary to think that these same people have been doing this, and this process has transformed the world we live in. And I'm sort of passionately interested in technology, but also in what the awful things technology has inadvertently we've been destroying the environment, and that sort of crept up on human beings. We now recognize that that we are in great danger of wrecking the whole planet, and it all came about from very interesting processes like smelting iron, from digging up rocks in stream beds and learning how to hammer them into knives and useful tools. And these people I stayed with, and that's the most moving, and I'm in awe of the whole story, really, less rather than the individual people themselves.
And that iron that they were creating, what objects would that iron go on to? Did you see objects that iron created, or would that be a separate group of people who would be processing, smithing effectively, I suppose?
They did everything, but the most this what I'm on my finger. This is something. This ring was made from the bloom that we made. And there's a big lesson I learned. I was very disappointed when they produced the bloom, because it was rubbish. It was terrible. These were the people above anyone else who knew how to do this, and the bloom was terrible. They said it was because the ore we collected was just the rubbish left behind because they couldn't go down the mine, which is fair enough. But I realized that we tend to value things according to how much we produce. What I didn't realize is that the first iron from any furnace is very special. Virgin iron, the iron that first comes out of the furnace, has incredible kind of meaning and significance. So they'll make nails out of that iron and put them into the walls of their house to protect them against lightning. There's a lot of beliefs about the material that, of course, are nonsense to us. But it made me realize that it's how I thought about what is a good, what's a good result? Is it how much you make or how fast you make it? They weren't bothered to have not made much. They were very happy. We made a few knives, and they were fairly humble items, hoes and things they could use.
I always remember that the sensation of making.
Oh, I'll just plug in. I seem to have
run out of gas.
I'll just connect it up. That might help.
I think you're probably waving that ring in its direction or something.
Hopefully that will be charging up again.
Oh, okay. I can still hear you actually, which is good.
Okay, I'll plug it in would help.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very jealous of your beard. I think I might have a crack at growing one of those. But
well, you don't have to do much.
I always remember the sensation of looking at Phil created a cooking pot for us, and we tried to cook inside the pot. And after it had cracked a few times and everything ran over, I sort of felt what an amazing object the basic iron cooking pot, which Britain, I think, sent all over the place, manufactured in Birmingham, but originally those iron cooking pots must have been an amazing wonder for the average Iron Age hut circle.
You're talking about the Iron Age ones, not the cast ones that later.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yes, I think so, and I think the main reason for that is you need to produce very soft iron, and you need to have good quality soft iron, and you need to have the skills to hammer it out into sheets before you can begin to think about making one of those cooking pots. And they're very impressive. They're very impressive. I don't think there are many people who could knock them up now.
The other transition I wanted to bring up is the idea that the move from iron to steel. And there's one object I remember seeing many, many years ago in the Tutankhamun exhibition of a steel dagger that was very early, a steel knife. And getting steel made must have been, was that a magical step forward again? Is steel, what do you have to do to create steel, and what objects are the earliest objects we've got that are steel objects?
Okay, well, in my understanding, there's a bit of a confusion there, because that object, that dagger, was made from meteoric iron. And the quality of that weapon has to do with the amount of nickel that's alloyed to the iron. That's just a natural form. That was never smelted, it was hammered out. That's as I understand it, if that's the one you're talking about. To begin with, in the Iron Age, I think people would find it hard to control whether they were getting iron or steel in their furnace, because you can get both, and you often do get both in the same furnace, in the same smelt. So as you hammer out your bloom, some of it is steely and some of it is iron. And certainly by, I think, 300 BC, there are tools and weapons that they've separated the steely component from the iron component. There's a sandwich, the hard steel is on the outside, the soft iron in the inside. They were able to recognize the difference by 300 BC in this country. I think it's a question of recognizing how to control the furnace, and then what you've got coming out of the furnace, which you'd recognize under the hammer. And I think that that's a long, slow evolution that went on and on through the centuries. Later on, when furnaces were fired in a different way and started producing liquid iron, as opposed to bloomery iron, which has never been molten, the story, there's another chapter in the story, because then you have to burn out the excess carbon in the cast iron to turn it back into steel. So it's a complicated story, and the evolution of it's gone on without ceasing up until, well, even now, I imagine. But I don't know much about modern steels, but it's a very long story.
I think on Time Team, Jake, we once did, is it a Bessemer furnace or something?
Yes,
like that,
yeah.
Which required coke,
yes,
and amazingly high temperatures, and
yes,
quite a process.
Yeah.
But it's,
well, I haven't done one of those.
yes.
I've got plenty to learn about the earlier versions.
And Jake, of the objects that you yourself have made along the way, or had made, which one sticks in your, if I'm going to send you off to Valhalla to meet, I think there was a Viking god or something called Wayland the Smith, or
yes.
If you're going off to Valhalla with an object, which object would you choose to take with you?
Well, I'd probably take something that would impress, that I made the iron and I made the steel for, yeah. But quite a well-known smith, Hector Cole, actually turned it into a very fine sword. Oh. And this was the sword. Terry Pratchett, having been knighted, wanted to have his own sword and asked me to help him do it. So I did a couple of smelts in his garden, and we made some fine iron and some nice steel. And then it went away to Hector Cole, who turned it into a beautiful sword. So I'd probably ask, I'd ask Terry's family if I could borrow that for the visit. But actually, I like little humble things. I made this little knife last summer, and I'm excited about this because I made this from these marcasite nodules, which are reckoned to be rubbish because they've got sulfur in. And these were all over an archaeological site at Avebury. And there were so many coming up. I asked the students to collect them, and I just wanted to see if I could make something from them, and made this lovely little knife. So that's as humble as you could get, but I got a lot of satisfaction from.
Can you hold it in the middle of the screen a second, Jake?
Oh, sorry.
So we can see it. That's
oh, yeah.
Up a bit. That's it. So
what's pleasing about it is,
yeah.
On the morning I was picking up this marcasite, I was in the trench and found a Neolithic knife, a lovely Neolithic knife, and right next to it, a Saxon knife that was perfect. So this is a copy of that Saxon knife, made out of the marcasite we found in the same field. So that's very humble, but I got a lot of satisfaction from that.
What do you plan? What would you like to achieve now? What's the next thing you want to achieve in terms of smelting, or in terms of your research worldwide? Is there a place you want to go you haven't been yet? What's the next step for you?
Okay, well, there are three things that come to mind. One is I want to make this bell, a replica of this bell from Ireland. And I'm trying to organize that as an event, a storytelling event. So while we actually produce the bloom from the ore, the finest storytellers are telling the story of iron. And it would be a 2-evening performance. And I'm trying to set that up and get funding for it. That's one. Second thing is, I'd try and see if there's someone I used to know called Tim Taylor, very fine musician and Beatles singer that I came across years ago, and I just haven't yet asked him whether he'd stir him up, see if we could do one last time team event. There's a field in Wiltshire with an amazing smelt underneath it, and it's the field where Terry Pratchett's sword came from, and there was a great deal of smelting took place over a very short period, possibly to get the iron for building Salisbury Cathedral. And it's a wonderful site. It's also got a Roman furnace on it, and there's a sacred shrine where they found votive offerings of miniature blacksmithing tools in the same area. So what a place for a final time team event. And the third thing is there's an extraordinary site in Madagascar where they've found bowl furnaces that clearly produce the tools for cutting stone for an industry of big stone artifacts. And up to now, people have rather dismissed bowl furnaces being a crazy idea. But there's a lot of evidence there that these actually were used over a number of decades, and I want to go there and make that work. So those are three projects.
Well, I can tell you that I'm officially going to enter your future time team site into our list.
Okay.
Of sites we're going to research and develop.
Okay.
And hopefully at some point or other, you and I will find ourselves in a field in Wiltshire somewhere.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to do that dig and maybe even play a few songs and afterwards.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that 3 of my sons know the entire Beatles repertoire, and every time they're together, they just say, as you did those evenings, they'll sing the whole songbook together in harmony. And whenever I hear them singing, I'm reminded of your singing all those years ago.
Jake, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. Thank you very much. And I really enjoyed our Time Team's connection with the people who made things. My father was an engineer, and he respected people who could make things with their hands in particular. And it was always a delight for me to have people like yourself, Damien Goodburn, and other people who had those essential skills, and to watch them on Time Team was a great thrill. So thank you very much for today. And I wish you good luck with I think the idea of making a story as a bloom is being made, as something's being smelted with music and poetry, and that bell at the end, I think that's a tremendous idea. So I wish you luck with that. And I hope you stay well on your many journeys around the world.
Thank you, Tim. And I'll send you those pictures through. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.